Guys, as you probably know, this has been a long time in the making. I'm really excited about this particular interview because, as you know, I've put thousands and thousands of hours in now to just acquainting myself with the low carb thing, keto, everything to do with health. And, you know, I've had the big name, we've had them on here, the Jimmy Moores, Eric Westman, Tim Knox, real big names have graced us with their time. And I've heard all of these guys, Gary Fettke talking about cornflakes, for God's sake, you know, it blows you away. But this woman blew me away big time. Her passion for what she's doing and the science that's emerging, the experiences that they're getting. In terms of her own longevity, her health span, as we heard last night, or last Wednesday, sorry, you know, what they're doing here and this woman's passion for this stuff is just awesome. So we're in for a treat, guys. So and let's hand over to Cara Collier of NutriSense. You'll remember NutriSense, guys, because that's where we did the experiment for them for 2 weeks. So remember, we were all caught up in that. It was fantastic. So Cara blew me away all those months ago on Paul Saladino's show. Let her blow you away now. And Cara, welcome to our evening. Thanks for giving us your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind words. I'm excited to be here.
That's very kind of you. It's kind of you. Well, what we do, Cara, is I kind of, on behalf of the group, I ask you to tell us a bit about your backstory, how you've got into what you're doing, and we'll take it from there. Yeah, that would be great if you could give us a bit of your
Absolutely. So I'm a registered dietitian, and I started my career in the traditional healthcare system. Yeah. So I was working in hospitals and primarily in ICUs, intensive care units, in quite a few hospitals in the US. So I was really seeing the sickest of the sick patients. And what I was experiencing was that people weren't coming in with things like gunshot wounds or car accident trauma. They were coming in with complications of lifestyle-related chronic conditions, day in, day out. So I was seeing people with completely uncontrolled diabetes who are now having to get a foot amputation or be put on hemodialysis, seeing people with fluid overload because of congestive heart failure. All of this suffering and pain and financial costs and human resources involved to care for these people, when really we could have prevented them from being there in the first place. So I was very frustrated with this experience. I felt like somebody who was trying to help these people, I couldn't in this situation because I was catching them 50 years down the road. These problems don't occur overnight, right? We don't wake up with diabetes. No. It takes 10 years to start getting signs of early insulin resistance, another 10 years before maybe diabetes, and then at least another 10 years before you're having a complication of diabetes. So this is accumulated bad habits. And I was catching people way too late down the road. And then in the traditional healthcare system, especially in the United States, we're really focused on addressing symptoms and what you're coming in for. So you have an infected foot ulcer because your diabetes is out of control. We're going to amputate that foot, put you on antibiotics, up your insulin dose, and send you home as fast as we can because we don't want you sitting in the hospital too long. If we don't address the root cause, which is uncontrolled diabetes and insulin resistance, you're going to come back in 60 days and we're going to have to do the same thing again and up your insulin dose even more. So I was very frustrated that we were never addressing the root causes of these conditions. Yeah. And then the patients themselves, they're frustrated and they've given up at this stage because they're having this suffering and these complications, and it's been going on for so long that they feel like they can't do anything about it. So all that experience, it's great to see what's happening in the real world. This is occurring everywhere, all over the world to millions of people. But I realized I couldn't make meaningful change in the way I wanted to in that system. So from there, decided to jump ship and kind of do something non-traditional and started the company NutriSense with 2 other co-founders. So what we're doing at NutriSense is we're really trying to build a program that is solving those problems I was seeing in the real world, but in a meaningful way. So we are using continuous glucose monitors, which is a technology normally used for insulin-dependent diabetics, where you put this device on your arm and for 14 days, you get to see your glucose 24/7. But we're trying to flip the switch on that and put these devices on non-diabetics, on people before they get to that stage, so we don't have to get there. So we can prevent these problems before they become full-blown complications or multiple chronic conditions.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're really trying to address those root causes of these conditions, which is metabolic dysfunction and insulin resistance, right? It's not just diabetes, it's chronic kidney disease, it's dementia, it's some cancers, heart disease, PCOS. All of these conditions have one thing in common, and that thing is insulin resistance. It's so pervasive across our, healthcare is the same condition. And so what we're trying to do is find that tool and that data that can address all of these conditions, but early on, so that we're not seeing all that suffering. And then a wonderful thing about these tools is you're getting data at you 24/7. And it's not vague advice. It's not a, random fad diet you heard online. It's personalized nutrition from your own body. And nothing is more meaningful to people than seeing real data from their own body 24/7. So it's been an amazing tool to drive behavior change. So I'm super, super excited about what we're doing, because we're actually now seeing people who are catching things really early. They're addressing these yellow flags before they become red flags, and they're motivated and excited by the data. So they're actually sticking with the changes they want to do, as opposed to doing something for 2 weeks and falling off the wagon. So that's where we're at now, and that's where I came from before, and why I'm super, super excited about addressing the heart of insulin resistance.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm so grateful for you pointing to this not just being about diabetes, because a lot of people think, well, I've not got it. They don't really know if they're on the road to it, but I don't have it, therefore I'm not interested. What's been amazing about the COVID thing has been endless people in this sphere coming back to insulin resistance and metabolic health issues, as you know. It's just consistent. And the thing about it, of course, is that, as you've just already said, it impacts on so many diseases, not only physical, but mental, deep depressions and really challenging anxieties. It's phenomenal. And for you guys this is why it was so exciting to me back with Paul Saladino. You find a way for the ordinary person to see what's going on in the body. I mean, when we did the experiment, people remember, I've been more or less keto for 4 years. And I thought on a Saturday night I could go out and just have a Chinese meal and a couple of glasses of, gin and tonic. It would be okay because I'm good all the rest of the week. Oh my God, I shot right out into the danger level, and it took forever to come back down again. And so I suppose what I think about is, what about the people who think, well, it's okay to have a slice of toast in the morning, then maybe what you would call a cookie, but we would call a biscuit in the afternoon with a cup of tea, and then maybe have a pasta or a rice dish. Oh my God, what is going on? And I think being able to see that, as you say, then address it personally, it's fantastic. So what are the things that are happening that are really exciting you, though? What are you witnessing?
Yeah, I think you make a very good point that it seems like we're doing something innocent, not that bad, but our bodies are telling us otherwise. Yeah. I think we have a fallacy as human beings to just compare ourselves to what we're seeing around us. So you, like me personally, I may say, I eat really healthy, way healthier than that person. And so I'm probably fine. Like, I can, for 2 days a row in the weekend, I can do whatever because I'm still way healthier than everyone around me. But your body doesn't know what everyone else is doing. It's not comparing and saying, oh, we're healthier than that person. No, it's still having the same reaction. So because everyone around us is extremely unhealthy, that doesn't mean that we can feel better about these decisions we're making, because the evidence is clear that these man-made hyperpalatable foods are disastrous to our body, unfortunately. They seem normal because they're everywhere and they're part of our daily routine and intake, but they're not normal for our bodies. There's nothing evolutionarily normal about potato chips or pastries or biscuits, right? So that's not something that our body was ever prepared to handle or process. And I think another good point is that it's very hard in traditional lab measures and traditional metrics to get a good early indication of insulin resistance. So you can't go to the doctor and get like one lab test that tells you I'm insulin resistant or not. That just doesn't exist. We can do like a euglycemic clamp in a research setting, but it's not ever going to happen in a common setting. It's really only for research purposes. So the question is, how do we know then early on if we're at risk or if our body's under some sort of stress and going through this early stage of insulin resistance? If you go to a doctor and you're getting, hemoglobin A1C and a fasting glucose value, those are usually the two metrics that they might use to assess your risk for diabetes and insulin resistance, and they're very lagging. We typically see that people are having early signs of insulin resistance 10 years before those two lab values start to become abnormal. So we're not catching it early with traditional measures because fasting glucose just telling you what's happening in a fasted state. Most of the time we're in a fed state, and the first signs of abnormalities happen after meals and how your body is processing a meal. And then hemoglobin A1C is just your average glucose. So you could be spiking way high and then having a big dip. Your average is perfectly normal. It's not catching those big swings in your glucose. So hemoglobin A1C could come back perfectly normal, but you're having huge glucose spikes during the day. Yeah. So we could completely miss that for a long time until it's become so abnormal that that starts to rise. Yeah. So CGM is one of the ways that we can really early on detect, oh, there's a little bit of mild insulin resistance here. Let's tweak these things. Let's be more consistent with our diet, and then we're good to go. It's just that easy. As opposed to, maybe we put a CGM on somebody who has more severe insulin resistance, like their lab values are already starting to go awry. I want people to know they're still in control. We can definitely correct that, but it's going to take a little bit more time because we caught it a little bit later. So the goal is being able to see this comprehensive data early on. Like a lot of people will be, why do I need to care about my glucose levels if I'm not diabetic? And the reason is we don't actually know if there's a problem yet by the lab markers you're using to assess if you're diabetic or not. And again, like we already talked about, it's not just diabetes, it's all of these other conditions. So we have to use these more comprehensive measures in order to prevent us from getting to that longer stage issue.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things you said, which is so important for everyone watching this, is it does take, from what I can hear, and you're reinforcing this, it takes 30 years to get to the point, oh, I've got a symptom now. And by then, for some people, it's too late. And the other, because they don't know that you can reverse out of it. And they're just going to go to the doctor and hopefully get some kind of pill. That's the attitude. The thing, of course, is that what's really challenging for us in the UK, a lot of Irish people are tuning into this and people from other parts of the world, but primarily a lot of Brits, we don't have a system where you can just go to the doctor and say, going to give me some tests. I mean, they're not going to do that. You only go if you've got a symptom. And so this is why getting people to break out of that paradigm that says, well, I'll wait till I get a symptom, it'll be too late perhaps, is to do this preventative work now. And that's where your company, I think, is so inspiring, because you're over there, wherever you are in America, and, here I am in Canterbury in England, and I can interact with the app. I can get that monitor. I can get the support from the team that you've got. And oh my God, I'm in control. And that was what was so empowering. And you must get such satisfaction out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so inspiring to see that people are actually able to make meaningful differences in their health right now through this data. Before we started this company, I really became obsessed with CGMs because I saw that there was potential there for the average person.
Yeah.
My goal is to get one of these on everybody, because if everybody knew what was happening in their body, it's so much more meaningful. And you said, you've been immersed in this information and you've been keto for about 4 years and you still learn things about yourself. Me, I'm a dietitian and I consider myself very healthy. I've worn, 15 CGMs now and I'm still learning things about myself. And when I'm not wearing one, I don't wear it 24/7, but I like to wear them every once in a while to check in, keep myself accountable. But when I'm not wearing one, that information that I learned from my own body, I don't forget. Like there are certain things, certain foods I know, like I uniquely just don't respond as well to. And that's something for people to know is we don't all have the same glucose responses to food. Every single one of us, even if we don't have insulin resistance, could eat the same exact healthy whole food, maybe a banana or a sweet potato, and we will all have very different glucose responses. Because at the end of the day, we are individuals. There is no one size fits all, and I cannot predict how you are going to respond to something. You just don't know unless you're measuring it. So like for me personally, some foods that give me the highest glucose spikes are quinoa and sweet potatoes and things like pineapple and apples. So there's a few random foods that I don't love. I'm not obsessed with them. So now I'm just going to say no to those. I'm always going to pick white potatoes over sweet potatoes because white potatoes actually work better for me. Yeah. Certain things that when you have that information about yourself, you can make more informed decisions. And then if I was eating every single day, 2 sweet potatoes, and I had no idea that it was sending my glucose sky high, I wouldn't know that for, like you said, 20, 30 years. A lot of this is silent disease happening in the background. We cannot feel early stages of insulin resistance. We cannot feel early stages of a high glucose value. You might feel a little lethargic after a meal or maybe some brain fog. That can certainly be associated with these higher glucose values. But for the most part, it's relatively silent disease that's happening in the background. And so, if you're only presenting with symptoms, if you're presenting because you're having extreme symptoms like fatigue or frequent thirst and urination, by that point, you probably have uncontrolled diabetes, not early insulin resistance. Yeah. And so it is something that we want people to start thinking proactively about. We don't do great. Sounds like it's not happening a lot where you are either. We don't do great about focusing on preventative health. No. But imagine how much easier it is if right now I just wear a sensor for a month. I know how I should behave then forever, and I never end up in those chronic conditions. I really believe it can be that simple. We just have to change the dialogue about what we need to be doing at an early age and an early stage. If we can make this part of routine care, once a year, you wear one CGM for 14 days, just check in, make sure everything's good, just like getting routine labs. Imagine what a difference we can make in how people have their outcomes in their lives 50 years later. So that's really what I'm excited about, is this becoming more routine as part of preventative care and just a general check-in.
I mean, what I'm really excited about and why I was so stimulated by what you said a way back with Paul Saladino is like in this country, as I said already, you can't just go to the doctor and say, I'd like some labs taken. They're just going to look at you and well, they don't have the foresight to do that. You need to be something wrong with you. But the thing here is that we've got this thing about expecting the doctor to give us a pill. And so even if you get someone says, I can't be bothered with this, till they get a symptom, and then they go to the doctor, very few of the doctors are aware of the stuff that everyone's watching and hearing on these things we're doing on a Wednesday night. Most doctors don't know. So they're just going to give you insulin. They're just going to take you down to get you even worse. But slowly but surely, doctors are waking up and the stuff is out there, but it's still a huge, sort of sea line or big shit to slowly but surely turn around. And so we need to take personal ownership. And I think it's quite hard for Brits especially to hear, I may have to pay for this, and go and just get one of these things and get that software and, you know, get a little contract with you guys for a month or whatever it is, and just learn, as you say. And what I loved about it is, I mean, look, I think, you know, occasionally having a bit of honey would be good for me. I very often lean towards carnivore in my journey with keto, like a lot of people. And I'm thinking, go to the Chinese, you know, if I get sort of spare ribs that are roasted in honey, that'll be okay. And on that first week of experiment, I have that with my normal thing, no rice. And I couldn't believe the response in my body. And it didn't go away immediately. It took hours to come back out of my system. It was frightening, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I hear what you're saying, we're all different, and rightly so. So finding, you know, being able to model this for ourselves. And as you say, I mean, if we spend a month a year or 2 weeks a year, and you get to know what works and what doesn't work by experimenting, then you can shape your food for the year. And I know that, and the other thing, I'd like to hear what you think about the COVID thing, because everything I'm hearing and everything that people following us are kind of hearing is that metabolic health, and you can reverse out fairly quickly by doing things. It'd be good to hear what you think as a nutritionist in this field now, because the COVID thing is why we get into this. Everybody joined me back there in February, and we've stayed together. What do you think about the COVID thing and the work you're doing? It seems to be so important, bringing those two together. Would that be right?
Yes, it's extremely important. I have lots of thoughts on this, but the big thing is, at this point, it's completely known and irrefutable that the link between our metabolic health and COVID is extremely strong. We can no longer deny that if you have metabolic dysfunction, if you have insulin resistance or any conditions that go along with that, your risk of both getting the infection and being symptomatic and having worse outcomes are dramatically increased. There's just no denying that anymore at this point. It should have been talked about much stronger at the very beginning, but I think finally it's becoming slightly more mainstream, maybe not on the main news, but enough people are talking about it. Yeah. And I really want people to know that now is the time to get metabolically healthy. This probably isn't going to be the last pathogen that comes as well. And every time a pathogen comes, it's going to be related to metabolic health. This is not new news, the link between just general immune system and metabolic health. When I used to work in the hospitals, one of my most frequent consults was from the surgical team, where somebody, if their glucose was too high, they have a high hemoglobin A1C or random glucose check, they won't operate on them because the infection risk is so high that they're like, not worth it. They need to get their glucose down. So I would get a consult and we have to go in and be like, we immediately need to get your glucose down. We can't even get it down with medications. And it's too high of an infection risk. So we've known this link between glucose levels specifically and immune system for a long time. It's not unique to COVID. It is just the relationship between how our body works. So even short-term hyperglycemia without diabetes can alter our innate immune system, and it dampens our immune response. So if we're in this immunosuppressed state because we have high glucose levels or insulin resistance, if something like a pathogen or COVID comes in, we're not prepared to handle it. And so that is part of the problem, is we have to be encouraging people to get their metabolic system in better shape so that if something comes, you're good to go. You know, you have an armor ready and your body's innate immune system can do its job. We want it to do its job. It should be able to fight off these things. And so I really strongly believe that this can either be a moment of inspiration and motivation for people, or it can be debilitating, and it's completely your choice. Like, we have to take health into our own hands. Just like you said, with physicians are finally kind of coming around with some of this information, but it's lagging. And the people who get the best care in the hospitals were the people who were advocates for their health. And they said, no, actually, what are you doing? What is that medication for? Why are you doing that? They're questioning, they're asking, they're paying attention.
Yeah.
The people who have the best outcomes, they care about it and they're advocates for their own health. You can't leave it up to somebody else, unfortunately. At the end of the day, it's your body that's going to have the effects. So you have to take control of that. So I truly believe we're in control and we can make great choices to see beneficial impacts in a short amount of time. A lot of people at the beginning of this, and I'm actually still seeing this messaging, and I'm interested to hear what you're seeing in your part of the world, but a lot of people I'm seeing are encouraging coddling behaviors during this time. They're saying, now's not the time to focus on your weight loss goals. Now's not the time to stick to your diet. Like, we're under stress, eat that ice cream and de-stress, enjoy. And I think that's the worst messaging we could ever send to somebody. What we learned in childhood nutrition courses of like how to raise a healthy child is to not use food as a reward or a punishment. That's rule number one. That applies to adults too. We shouldn't be using food as a reward or punishment. It's not. It's something to nourish us, or it's something that we enjoy in a social setting, but it's not a reward or a punishment. If I'm eating something bad, it should be because I made a mindful decision that I want it and I'm going to sit there and enjoy it, not because I'm reacting from stress or anxiety. And so I think it's a horrible messaging that we're saying, now's a time of stress, like just enjoy yourself with pizza and ice cream, like it will all blow over. First of all, if it's been a long time and it's going to keep happening, if we keep doing that, we're never ever going to get in a healthier state. So right now is a time where reward should actually help you and not be a punishment. Rewarding with junk food is actually hurting you in the long run. So I think if people decide to take this into their own hands, they can make really meaningful steps in a short amount of time. We can talk about all the different things that affect your glucose values, but if you do some simple changes right now, like sticking to as close to a whole food diet as possible, that's the easiest and main rule that we can follow, of just stick to whole foods. And that's going to get you so far just by doing that one thing. Nutrition can get confusing. There's lots of people saying, do plant-based, do carnivore, do low carb, do high carb, do this, do that. At the end of the day, first, let's focus on whole foods. Yeah. And if it's confusing, that rule will get you a long way. So instead of focusing on a super juice, just eat whole fruit, right? Or instead of focusing on your protein shake, just eat high quality meat, right? It's getting back to the roots of what is this food actually supposed to be like? What's its original state? Yeah. We don't eat nutrients. We don't eat saturated fat. We don't eat vitamin C. We eat food. So think about the food as a wholesome source. That's rule number one. And so along with that, what is not a whole food is processed carbohydrates, right? So a lot of people think of whole wheat flour as a whole food. It's not. That's a processed carbohydrate, because originally it was a wheat berry, and then we steamed it and rolled it and pulverized it into this little dust. Flour doesn't grow in the dirt. It's not a whole food anymore. And our body tolerates that as a processed food. So I think that's a common misconception, is like, I'm eating whole wheat pasta and I'm eating whole wheat bread. Why is my glucose still so high? And a lot of dietitians are saying to do those things. They're saying eat the whole wheat version. It really doesn't make that much of a difference. It's still a processed food. And a lot of times these whole wheat things are paired with some processed oil. And then we've got starchy things and fatty things together. And that is just a disaster in our body. That causes a metabolic gridlock at the source of the mitochondria. So our little mitochondria in our cells, they have to process this energy. And if you're throwing really easy to digest carbohydrates like flour and really processed oils at it, it's like, whoa, I have a ton of energy, and it goes into overdrive. And then what happens is you get things like reactive oxygen species, inflammation, things that can break your DNA, damage it, and things that can cause inflammatory response to come and have to clean up the area. And this is where people are like, well, I don't have overt diabetes. Why should I care about glucose? It's because on a zoomed in scale, if we're looking at this, it has to do with longevity. It's not just preventing diabetes, but it's every time we're putting stress on our body, on our mitochondria, on our cells, that's causing inflammation and reactive oxygen species, and it speeds up our epigenetic clock. We can age ourselves just by having these glucose excursions, even if we never get to the stage of insulin resistance and diabetes. That was a long answer, but that's sort of where I stand. Is I really want people to feel inspired by this situation, by COVID. It can be a time where, wow, I got the fire under my butt to take care of myself, because right now I have this time thing, where it might have taken 10 years to have a complication. COVID might speed that up to 2 weeks, right? So now we have this fire where it's like, I got to get it under control now. And I want that to inspire people. Yeah. We've had a lot of customers come to us who are like, I know I'm pre-diabetic. I have a family history of diabetes and COVID's happening and I don't want to die. I don't want to not be there for my children. Like I'm ready to get this under control. So I want everyone to hear that and to know that you can totally do it. And there are tools out there. And even if you can't afford a CGM or you're not going to do our program, you can do things like eat the whole foods, move your body more, go out and see the sunlight in the middle of the day, make sure you're going to bed early. These good self-care routines can make a huge, huge difference. You don't have to have fancy tool or fancy data to still make good choices and reduce your risk and improve your health, especially in this time of the pandemic when we have this extra fire going on.
I mean, when we did the experiment, that was my thinking, was if 30 of us could share our experiences, everybody else who couldn't quite afford it at the time, let's say, or still needed convincing, could learn from us all sharing. And a lot of people did, and a lot of people shared. Not everyone, some people kept it private, which is fair enough. And but I think what I'd love people to hear is, because sometimes people come in and watch one of these, and then maybe I don't see them for another 3 weeks, and they come in and watch another one, and they might just get the impression that this is an opinion. That they listen to Cara, oh, she's got this opinion. What I put thousands of hours in. This isn't an opinion. It's repeated scientific feedback that we're getting now. And the COVID thing, your response to it has got to do with your metabolic health. But we can, as you're saying, by taking even just whole foods, staying with your apple if you have to initially, but make sure and if you can get a really good one, not like I live in the age of orchards that are sprayed every other day. You don't want one of those apples, but point is whole foods, healthy whole foods. And so it can make a huge difference and can do it very quickly. But what I love about what you're doing is, if someone chooses to follow a process that they figured out for themselves, and/or they're in consultation with your specialist, you completely privatize it to yourself, and you get results. We know you can get results in as little as 10 days. 3 weeks afterwards, my God, you can be off and running back to health. Whereas the alternative is you keep drifting and drifting, and you end up in these dreadful places. And I go back to, there are people out there genuinely waiting in some laboratory somewhere coming up with an injection we can all get and go back about our business and still eat all the crappy food, and we'll be all right till as you say, the next one comes. We're at a crossroads in our history, I believe, because as you've said, the facts are there now. We can't deny this. The metabolic health is so, so important. And even just today, I mean, my family history is that everyone goes with a stroke, and that's just how it happens. And some younger than others. And the research into strokes and stuff is in your face. It's to do with carbohydrate, processed carbohydrate, and these oils you're talking about. And for 30, 40 years, I followed the so-called healthy diet, as everybody else did. But people heard me say that time and time again. But so what's currently really, really exciting you about what's happening in developments? I mean, when I first heard you, I don't know, that seems like months ago now, half a year ago when you were on Paul Saladino. the science must have progressed. I mean, what you guys are doing with the app, I know the app's been updated. So where you are as a business, how exciting is it?
Yeah, as a business, we're grown really quickly, which is exciting because a lot of people during COVID, they took this as a chance to take care of their health, which is so exciting and inspiring and awesome to see. So that's great. But what we're really trying to do is make this more focused on you get a picture of your metabolic health at a whole. So we're integrating with other types of lab metrics and not just glucose. I think glucose is extremely important and it can tell us a ton about our health. Our glucose, as many people are aware, doesn't just change if we eat carbs or not. It also changes depending on when you're eating, meal timing. It depends on your physical activity. It depends on stress and sleep. All of these things our glucose is affected by. So it gives you this very holistic picture of your health and not just carbs, way more than that. Yeah. But we want these other markers of health involved in our platform. So right now we're working really hard to integrate more fully with ketone data. And so you'll be able to see on your graph at the same time, if you're following a keto diet, which a lot of our customers do, you can see your ketone data with your glucose data, have analytics related to both and be able to easily compare them. But we also want you to be able to, from our app, order labs, get it delivered to your house, be able to take those and have it all in the app so it's integrated. So you can do things like check a lipid panel or checking a fasting insulin. These other labs that are very important to also monitor. And then things like blood pressure and things like heart rate. We want to integrate with these other apps that are pulling these data to have it one centralized location. So I can very easily and quickly get a robust look at my metabolic health. And as you are aware, and some of the people who tried our program, every new customer that does this gets a dietitian to help them through their journey. Yeah. And we believe that this is so important because our bodies are complex. It can get confusing. Yeah. Like you said, you had some glucose spikes that surprised you. And for a lot of people, they're like, I have no idea what's happening. So we have somebody there who really can help break it down for you, suggest changes on how to optimize your glucose values, how to prevent that spike from happening the next time, or just hold you accountable and keep you on track. The dietitians are there to be able to be utilized however way you like. Some of our customers, they just want reliable source of information. They're like, I'm exploring this idea, or I'm concerned about this area of nutrition. What do you think? And we can give them research and tell them what we've learned. Where some people, they want to know, I have prediabetes, how do I fix this? And then for others, it's like, I know exactly what I need to do, but sometimes I don't do it. Can you help me stay on track? So it really depends on where the customer's at. But you have a real human who's trained in this, an expert in metabolic health to help you along your journey. And I think that is so important. Obviously, I'm a dietitian, so I'm a little biased and I lead that team. But I think having that human aspect and some signal in the noise is really important to be able to make actionable and meaningful steps towards improving your health. And that's really the end goal, is optimizing metabolic health and prevention and catching things early.
Yeah, and in your own profession, the dietitian, I mean, the traditional dietitians haven't up until recently been getting this, have they? They've been still pushing the same old. How are you finding that they're also, like doctors, slowly turning around?
Very slowly, like doctors. And just like there's a few good doctors out there saying this and totally on top of it, there are some good dietitians out there. I work very, very hard to vet people very hard and make sure they're obviously thinking outside the box and up to date. Because the recommendations, the dietary guidelines, my plate, are so outdated and so antiquated and so biased by government policies and whoever's got the biggest pocketbook. So if we're following those, that doesn't mean we're going to have the best health outcomes for customers and for the people we're trying to help. And so I do still believe it's very lagging. The education to become a dietitian is great in that you're getting a lot of fundamentals about how the body works, like metabolism and biochemistry. But then second part of the education, the actual recommendations are, I don't think I follow any of those that I've been formally taught, but I can at least pull on the fact that I understand the body really well to understand the science and what actually makes sense. So we're always looking for dietitians who are thinking for themselves and really up to date on what's actually working versus just following the general guidelines. So my team is very handpicked and curated to be that type of dietitian, but I would not say that it's the average dietitian, unfortunately. But hopefully we're growing that way. And I think things like podcasts and interviews and social media, it actually, a lot of people are saying technology makes everything worse. And I think it makes a lot of things way better. We have so much access to amazing information, and these people who are, have a very interesting point of view that normally would only the people around them would be able to hear. Now we can all learn together and collaborate. I can collaborate across the world with people who have similar ideas and are thinking outside the box. So I think with that, both dietitians and physicians and other healthcare providers, I think will grow at a faster rate because of podcasts and social media. There is, of course, there's a double-edged sword to that, where there's also a lot of bad information out there, and there's a lot of fad diets or unhelpful things. But at the end of the day, you have to think for yourself, just like you have to be an advocate for your own health. You have to think for yourself and not just follow what everyone is saying, which is why I'm very about data-driven decisions. Like, check for yourself, see what your body tells you, and then you'll know for sure, as opposed to not, just following whatever someone is telling you.
No, that's fantastic advice, and so obvious, really, isn't it? But so, given that you have this experience and growing, you're actually only the second female we managed to get to be interviewed. It's quite bizarre. I had put out lots of interview invites, and lots of women said, "Oh yeah, I'll come on," but for various reasons I couldn't get them. And the previous two we did was with a co-author of the book Bio Diet, which was Dale Drury. She was literally on the other night in the second phase. And one of the things we started to talk about, which wasn't, it shouldn't be, but, for a man asking a woman, but the thing was that she's, the obvious thing about getting into this way is that women's stuff, for one of a silly term, seems to ease up. There's much better things going on for women. Are you finding that the people coming to you, they're using this technology and the sort of challenges that women can have in the later part of their lives or their cycles, has that been helpful, do you think?
Oh yeah, women and men are not the same people. Like, I don't know if you follow Stacey Sims at all. She specializes in like women athletes, and she has this phrase that women are not small men, and I love that, because we're not just a smaller version of a man. We have completely different physiologies. Right. And like, that's obvious, but it's not that obvious also, because a lot of the research is done on men. Women in their menstruating years are often excluded from research because that's another variable the researchers have to control for, is a menstrual cycle. So they just exclude them. And guess what? Those research results from the men or postmenopausal women don't necessarily apply to women. So that's something that everyone should know, is that you need to dig deeper and actually see, has any research of this been done on women? Is it the same thing? An interesting example is the classic symptoms of a heart attack is left shoulder pain. And then all these women were coming into hospitals with heart attacks, but they were presenting with like flu-like symptoms. And so everyone was like, oh no, you're fine, it's just the flu. And then we realized that actually men tend to present with the shoulder pain and women tend to present with flu-like symptoms, but we never studied women having heart attacks, so completely missed that. And how many people got turned away? That's just an example. I get upset about this because women are neglected in research. Yeah. But we see huge differences between men and women in their glucose data and how this can specifically help women. One is, of course, that our hormones differ and depending on the time of the month. So for the women out there listening, most people tend to have higher glucose values during the luteal phase, which is the week 3 and 4 of your menstrual cycle. And that's when you have lower estrogen and progesterone peaks. And this is a time where you have lower glycogen turnover. So your storage form of glucose gets kind of stuck in storage form. You have decreased insulin sensitivity. So your body isn't responding as easily to the signal from insulin. And then you're going to have higher glucose values because of those two things. And this is also the time of the month that women tend to have cravings and mood swings. And so that's also usually the time where we're eating more sugary carbohydrate foods and our body is less prepared for it. So being able to have that data during that time of the month and see, wow, my body is changing on its own. There's nothing I can do about that, but I can change how I respond and I can change how I act during that time. It might be a better time for me to be very low carbohydrate during that week. And everyone responds a little bit differently. Some people have a very dramatic response to this, more sensitive to the effects of hormones than others. But that's one major example. Another is, of course, when women are going through menopause and perimenopause. This is a time of massive hormone fluctuations. And any time our hormones are changing, that's gonna affect everything else. Our hormones dictate everything. Just like insulin is a hormone, it creates all these types of downstream effects. Other hormones, they all do this. They're communicators in our body. And so when we're going through menopause and our hormones are fluctuating and we're having things like hot flashes, it can be an independent risk factor for high glucose values due to the decline in estrogen at that time. And so this is a time almost everyone who's going through menopause or postmenopausal, they do much better with a very low carbohydrate or at least moderately low carbohydrate diet because they're no longer as insulin sensitive. It's just a matter of fact. Women are always like, we have a lot of couples who do the program together and they're like, my husband can eat the same thing as me and their glucose is fine, perfect, and mine is all over the place. And it's like, it is an unfortunate truth. Women tend to be more carbohydrate sensitive than men because of hormones, but also we usually have less lean body tissue, lean body mass, muscle. This is usually a huge sink for glucose disposal. Our muscles pick up a lot of that glucose, which is why I encourage everyone to do strength training, not just men, but men in general have more muscle mass. And so they're going to be able to process those carbohydrates, those glucose faster than women on average. But usually women are not as carbohydrate tolerant, and especially at certain times of the month, and especially during menopause. So this is unfortunately just a fact of life, and it's just something we have to deal with. And knowing that information, though, can be empowering because you can see, okay, this is something that's happening to my body. I have no control over that, but I can control what I do in response to it, and I can make sure I don't make it worse. And so it's a time for many that is better to be a lower carbohydrate if you're not already.
I mean, it's so insightful because, you know, I naively, as a man, think, why don't I get 30 people to go on a fortnightly thing with NutriSense and we'll do this experiment? Not thinking for 1 minute that a woman's cycle, depending where they are, week 1, 2, 3, or 4, or somewhere in between, would have an effect on that. I mean, who would have thought that? But you guys. So what I'm thinking now, of course, is my intuition is to do it again do 2 of them for a month. So I can really experiment. I want to do a bit of carnivore right through to veganism and see what starts to happen. That'd be really exciting for me. But I think obviously from what you've just said, for a woman who's going through the monthly cycle thing, that's going to be amazing, isn't it? Just to follow that. That's awesome.
Yeah, to be able to capture that full month when you're going through those different changes. In the middle of your menstrual cycle during ovulation, your estrogen levels can go from 10 to 300 in 48 hours. Wow. That's a hormonal fluctuation that a man will never, ever experience. And we're having that every month. It's a huge change. Like, I don't think a lot of women even realize how dramatic it is every time. And any dramatic change in hormones, like I said, is going to have an effect on our body. It's just part of the way it works.
But again, I mean, I'm not a woman, obviously, but if I were a woman, I think it'd be incredibly empowering to be able to understand that cycle in terms of what's going on in my body by getting this science and these other things that metrics that you're keeping your eye on. You really begin to empower yourself to live your life to the max. It's fantastic.
Definitely. Yeah. And some women are like, they're like, oh, I always I can't lose this weight during this period, or I'm not doing as well at the gym. I'm having cravings, and they feel bad about themselves. They feel like they did something wrong. And it is empowering to be like, no, that's just your body doing its normal cycle, and that's completely healthy, and it's okay. And, in the next week, you're going to see lower values, and we can compensate for that with our lifestyle decisions and what we're doing. But it can be empowering to know the source of these symptoms and these side effects, and know that, you don't have to self-blame during this time, because changes are happening and changes are going to occur.
I suppose the obvious question, which I think people want me to ask you, is, so your own lifestyle, what does that typically look like? I mean, you're observing all of this data coming in from all sorts of sources. How is that influencing you? And maybe some of your colleagues, your fellow directors that form the business. Has it changed your lifestyles? Are you following a pattern? Are you disciplined? Are you experimenting? What's going on there?
Yeah, I've changed what I've done a lot, actually, in result of just the data I've learned about myself. So a small example I said earlier was I just learned those specific foods I don't tolerate as well, and now I just don't eat them. Like the quinoa one is always interesting to me, because rice and white rice I respond really well to, and quinoa I respond really high. So a lot of times it's like an extra charge to have quinoa instead of rice, but I'm like, well, quinoa is way worse. I'm never going to eat quinoa. So just learning those unique foods that I respond better to. But the number one thing that I have learned, both from my data, and it's something that I've seen in everyone's data, it's just a universal truth, is that people do not respond as well to food later in the evening. The timing of our meals is so important. This earlier time restricted eating window works really, really, really well for me and for a lot of people. Our hormones work on a circadian rhythm, just like melatonin, which is a more obvious example. Our hormones, like insulin, they work on a circadian rhythm, and we are most insulin sensitive in the daytime hours, and we're least insulin sensitive in the middle of the night. And so as it starts getting closer to nighttime, our body's just not as sensitive to carbohydrates or food in general. Insulin helps process all of our food, and it's not just carbohydrates. And so I'm much more careful about when I'm eating. If somebody has food around and it's 8 p.m., it's not even tempting to me anymore, because I know the trade-offs I'm making, and I'm like, nah, I'm like not gonna have 2 bites of something that isn't even gonna do anything for me if it's 7 p.m., 8 p.m. So it's very easy for me now to be more strict with my eating window, because I've seen that it actually matters, and it's not just something I thought I was supposed to do. That's a big one. Another one is I've always been very religious about working out. It's my stress relief. I love lifting weights. I'm a huge proponent of strength training. So I've never been somebody that it struggled to find motivation to go to the gym. But now I'm much more motivated to also move throughout the day, because I see how much of a difference simple movements make. So a 10-minute walk after you eat can make a world of a difference on your glucose values. Going on a 30-minute walk in the morning when I'm fasted make a huge difference for the whole rest of the day. Breaking up movement. I'm working at a startup. I'm working long hours. I'm in front of my computer a lot. I have a kettlebell next to my desk, and I just do some swings every once in a while to break up sitting and sitting in front of a computer. So small things like that, where I'm much more cognizant of making sure I'm getting in movement throughout the day, because I see what a meaningful impact that can make in my data. It's extremely motivating when you know what a difference it can make. So that's a big thing I do. I also have adjusted my diet a lot in response to my menstrual cycle, like we were talking about, because I'm one of those people that is very sensitive to that effect. So before I was really measuring this data too much, I would do mostly a generally low carb but not ketogenic approach. And so low carb, whole food, high protein, higher fat. And then I would do like 2 or 3 months of a ketogenic diet in the winter as kind of like a seasonal cyclical approach, and then lower carb the rest of the year. But now I do more like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So more 2 weeks strict ketogenic diet during that luteal phase, and then 2 weeks of like lower carb during the other 2 weeks. And I find that that works really well for me. There are some carbohydrate foods I like and I enjoy having in my diet and I respond really well to. So that's why I like having like 2 weeks of a lower carbohydrate, still like usually 100 grams of carbohydrates maybe or less. And I stay very well controlled with that amount, especially given my activity level. But then I like those periods of having even lower, 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrates. So now I do a more monthly cyclical approach with the ketogenic diet, which I'm still tweaking all the time. Everyone's always playing around with their diet, and you should play around with it. But that's what I've really been liking lately.
This is why we needed to get women on, because this is fantastic input. I'm sure all the women who are watching this are just inspired now that you can 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, as it were. And it just makes so much sense. It's inspiring. And again, a lot of the podcasts I listen to, it's mostly men. They're never going to talk about that. They're not going to know that.
Yeah.
So that's just fantastic. Absolutely amazing. Yeah. So, is there anything? Do you occasionally treat yourself to a glass of wine or something like that, or is that a no-no? Or
yeah, and I'm not super strict. I do believe that we should be able to have a treat or something every once in a while. Like I said earlier, it's not a reward. It's not like, oh, I've been really good, I deserve this donut. Yeah. It's no, I'm in a mindful situation and I want this and I feel okay about it. I don't feel like my body is this like fragile system. If I do one thing that's bad, it's going to crumble and fall apart. Yeah. I believe that I'm resilient. So yes, I have bad foods every once in a while, but I'm very mindful about it. And I make sure it's something that's actually worth it. And it's never because I'm stressed or I'm bored or because it's just in front of me. Someone brought around donuts and I don't even like donuts, but I ate it because it's right there. It's never that. It's always a mindful decision. I don't drink that often. Every once in a while, I'll have a glass of wine, but sometimes I'm a foodie. I enjoy the creativity that comes with food and restaurants. I haven't been going to restaurants as often because they've been closed and I don't find it to be the same experience to do takeout. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the social experience and the creativity of a dining experience. But normally I like to go to restaurants and enjoy something unique that a chef has been able to put together. And I'm not going to do it to a certain dietary component. I'm just going to enjoy the meal and that's perfectly fine. So I do things for enjoyment as well, because I'm a human being and I think that it's okay, but I care about my body and I do a lot of practices on my day in and day out that are so routine and habitual that it's okay to do those things because my body will be able to handle it. And there's some things that just aren't worth it. Like I'll never I have a few no rules. Like it's the mindful thing where it's like, I'm not going to eat something just because it's there, even if I'm not excited about it. I'm never going to eat anything super late in the middle of the night. Not worth it. I'm never going to combine something like sugary high fructose with alcohol. That's like, I'm never going to do that. Like there's a few things I'm just like the hard line in the sand, but there's wiggle room around that to be able to live my life and enjoy my life as well.
Fantastic. I mean, there's that term, intermittent fasting. I don't think it's a particularly good phrase because fasting for most people means hunger. It doesn't mean fasting. It means being in a state of hunger for till the time you can eat again. But maybe intermittent lifestyle, and I think for myself narrowing my food window in to anywhere between 12 o'clock till the very latest 6 o'clock in the evening has been amazing for quality of sleep, for dynamic, feeling, clarity of thought, and of course whole foods, keto orientated. But I treat myself on a Saturday night to that carry out for Chinese meal because the restaurant's amazing, the chef's unbelievable, but it's all keto, and when I did it the second time, my score was much better, and so on. So I was quite inspired by that. So no, it's good to know that you're doing that intermittent fasting type thing too.
Definitely.
The word fasting I don't think is helpful, but that process of the window. Is there anything else that now that you do know what you know in the conversations you're having with your colleagues, that you could maybe advise us to think about You know, hopefully, I mean, I don't see it being right next week, but I would like to think that come the autumn, when the weather changes, it's changing now, but when we're in it, thinking October, mid-October, I'm going to see if I can get a bunch of people to do the experiment again, and we'll go for the month. And obviously, having you on here, next Wednesday is going to create a debate, hopefully, and hopefully over the course of a few weeks, we'll get a team together to do it again. And that would be just fantastic. But is there anything else that you're hearing on the grapevine, or you're in conversations and you're on other podcasts and other stuff, and you're picking up material? Is there anything that's really exciting you about the immediate future, or stuff you guys are talking about?
Yeah, in the immediate future, I mean, one thing that's not as flashy or like on the pipeline, but I like to reiterate a lot with people. We talk a lot about diet, and we talk a lot about exercise, and we talk a lot about fasting, because those are easy concepts to grasp, but just as important in preventing insulin resistance and controlling our glucose values and having optimal health is making sure you're addressing the pillars of sleep and stress. So those are two things where we want to incorporate more data points so people can get a better grasp on these harder to quantify measures. I think technology like Oura Ring and other HRV markers are amazing because people are starting to be able to quantify this. We have a hard time as humans grasping these subjective things like, am I stressed or not? People are like, no, I'm not stressed. And I'm like, I think you might be. And I think maybe we'd still benefit from some of these stress management practices. So you can see that in your data sometimes, especially like an acutely stressful moment, you will have a glucose spike. And if you're having chronic stress, a lot of anxiety, rumination, that is one of the biggest drivers for elevated fasting glucose values and overnight values while you're sleeping. Because while you're sleeping, your body is stimulating cortisol and adrenaline and putting out these hormones that stimulate your body to make glucose, because it's like, we're under stress, we need to make sugar, and you probably don't need extra glucose to deal with whatever stressor you have at hand. We don't usually need extra sugar to deal with, you know, work emails or to deal with fighting with your sibling or your spouse. So we don't need to be pumping out extra sugar, but our body is doing that anyway because it's our natural stress response. So better ways to quantify and be able to pinpoint these stressful factors in people's lives, whether it's psychological stress, physical stress from illness, injury, or from sleep. Lack of sleep is a stressor on the body. When you have a poor night of sleep, the next day you are just as insulin resistant as a diabetic. And that is just a fact. You know, it puts our body in this extremely insulin resistant state because your body's under a ton of stress. It just got 4 hours of sleep or really interrupted. Even if were in bed for 8 hours, it was interrupted waking up, you know, never getting to deep sleep. That's the same as if you only slept for maybe 4 hours. And our body experiences this as stress, and glucose levels skyrocket and insulin sensitivity plummets. And so we're in this insulin resistant state. We can correct that with a good night of sleep the next day. But if you're chronically not sleeping well, we have a lot of physicians on our platform who don't get much sleep. They're sleeping 5 hours a night, day after day after day after day, and they can't eat any carbohydrates because they'll have values up, you know, into diabetic levels because they're in such a temporary insulin resistant state. We could fix that if we get some sleep, but because they're doing it chronically, we're not ever getting to fix that. And so these are factors I want people to pay attention to too and think about in their health. It's easy to think about, what should I eat? How do I build the perfect diet? What are my perfect macros? Because we have to eat. So people are thinking about that, but they don't have to think about stress or sleep. So I'm trying to put that as a priority in people's minds because I've seen it in the data. It's just as important. It's something we really have to pay attention to.
You know, I suspect people who are watching this, you know, when I tell them it's you, that's the next person, and they're going to sort of have preconceived, oh, this is going to be yet again about keto and blah, blah, blah. What you've just said is such an amazing breakthrough. I mean, can you just repeat what you said there? Because here's what I heard. I think here's what I heard. If you have a challenging night's sleep, the next day, you're more or less going to be performing like a diabetic. Is that really what you just said?
It's exactly true. And it
Wow.
does sound scary, but it's true. And
Wow.
there's actually a lot of research on this, but I've also seen it in people's data time and time again, and it's a real thing. And this is both with interrupted sleep, where you're not getting deep sleep, high quality sleep, and also with shortened sleep. So both of those are going to equal to an insulin resistant state. And something you mentioned earlier, when you're having your fasted window, you're sleeping better. So it goes both ways too. So if we have a bad night of sleep, we're going to have higher glucose values the next day. But if we're going into bed with high glucose values, we're not going to be able to get as good of a night of sleep. It interrupts our ability to get into that deep sleep. So it goes both ways. If we want to get good sleep, we also have to take care of ourselves during the day. And we have to make sure we get good sleep so that we can be well off the next day. It's a cycle. So you have to think about both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. And so again, again, that's just unbelievable. But I think what we're hearing is you're kind to yourself because you occasionally will enjoy a food that you know you shouldn't have, but you're going to have it and you're going to enjoy it. You're going to go out and have a meal with a great chef and you're just going to let them do what they do and you're just going to enjoy that. But by and large, what you're doing, I think I'm hearing what you're doing is that this, over the course of a month, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, what you're saying as a woman at your age is what you're saying is, look, I'm having maybe up to 200 grams of carbs for 2 weeks every day. And then for the other, I'm back down to the 30-ish, 20, 30. I hope people can hear that. You really can't do 400, 500, 600, 1,000. I'm not sleeping in, kid on that you're not going to end up in a mess.
Yeah, and I would say 200 is definitely my upper threshold. I'm usually on those lower carb days eating between 100 and 150 grams of carbohydrates. Yeah. And for reference, like I'm working out every day and I'm eating about like 2,400 calories. So a pretty good amount for my size. So 100 to 150 grams of carbohydrates is still relatively on the lower end of the spectrum. But I do want people to know, if you're not insulin resistant, if you're active, like you can have some carbohydrates in your diet and it's going to be okay. But there's also, from an evolutionary perspective, it's probably very likely we also had times without carbohydrates in our diet. So I really believe in this cyclical approach. If people enjoy carbs and want to have some, if you don't, that's fine. You don't need them either. They're not essential. Exactly. But, the cyclical approach probably makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. Most people in the world are always having carbohydrates, right? They're never not having carbohydrates and they're never not running only off of glucose. So along with that comes, periods of no carbohydrates or really low. And so if you're always having carbohydrates, you might want to think about sometimes having these periods of lower carbohydrates. Yeah. And it can work differently for everyone. There's no one size fits all approach for that either, but it's something to keep into consideration.
Yeah. No, just the whole conversation we've had is just extraordinary, especially around the sleep thing. I think, my God, and I mean, people who've been following me anyway, the reason why I get into this work 30 years ago was because people dropped down dead on me over a fortnight because of stress. But stress 30 years ago in Glasgow, where I was a younger man doing what I was doing, nobody would talk about stress. It was a hard city. You couldn't say you were stressed. You would never get a job. But now that stress is well known, we have people watching us have got great techniques for managing stress. We should be sleeping better, but now if you're not sleeping, you now know why. There's this mad cycle with carbs. So look, I'm aware we've gone right over the hour. Is there anything you would like to leave us with? This is just flowing by like it always does, but this has been just amazing, Cara, just amazing.
Yeah, what I like to just tell people is that they are in control. You can be in control of your health. Don't feel overwhelmed or debilitated. If you have diabetes and cardiovascular disease, if you have multiple chronic conditions, you can totally improve your situation as well. And if you don't have it, if you have no diagnosed conditions, make sure you're still taking care of your health and paying attention to this early on. And so I want people to know that they can be in control and they can do something about it. And all you have to do is just be proactive and Now, hopefully there's resources out there to help people, whether it's us or somebody else. Just feel motivated and inspired that you can totally turn your situation around if you're feeling down about it, or if you feel like it's too much, you can do something about it.
Yeah. I just finally, I noticed Jimmy Moore's, I get all the podcasts, and I don't listen to every one of them because I can't, obviously, but I jumping back and forward. I noticed in Jimmy's, one because I got a subscription to him, some mad research going on about these monitors being sort of false or something. Did you pick up on any of that? Is that just really some bad science or someone being at it?
With accuracy issues?
Yes.
Every once in a while, a sensor will malfunction. It happens about like 3% of the time, where just the device, for whatever reason, malfunctions. If that happens, we replace it for people free of cost.
Yes.
Obviously, we want them to have the data and not a malfunctioning sensor. So it happens. Unfortunately, the technology isn't always perfect, but we do replace it for people if that does occur. But other than that, from 97% of the time, you should be having a good functioning device without any issues. So it's not foolproof, or they're never going to have issues. We don't make the devices, unfortunately, but they should continue to improve over time. They're relatively new technology. 10 years ago, these devices only lasted 4 days, and now they last 14 days, and they're much smaller. So the improvement in a short amount of time has already been amazing. Yeah. So we anticipate that the technology is just going to continue to improve and get better and better.
The funny thing about it was when you see it stuck, on your arm, you think, how on earth did that get there? That must be very painful. How to get it off? That must be and it's nothing. It's just and it's there.
It's true. It's very easy. If anyone's scared of putting it on, it's not painful at all. It's super simple. Yeah.
It's bizarre when it's on you, but
yeah.
don't want to look at it. But that's great. Listen, Cara, thanks I know you're so busy with building the business. I know you're in lots of podcasts and stuff. It's just, the work you're doing is fantastic. And the information you've given us today, especially in those latter points there, and the whole thing about the women's cycle, and oh my God, this is probably going to be one of the best ones we've done. So, Cara, thank you. And as I say, all the best for the future. And let's see, maybe in a month's time, maybe less, we'll be in touch to see if we can get another project going. Yeah?
Yeah, that would be awesome. I appreciate you having me. I'm always happy to help and give any information that might be useful to people.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Cara. Okay. So I'll just